The autumn air carried a sharp bite as it swept through the quiet streets of Willow Creek, a suburban enclave where every lawn was manicured to perfection and every mailbox stood at precisely the same angle. For Ellen Harper, a widow of 3 years, this neighborhood had once been a sanctuary, a place where she and her late husband, Daniel, had dreamed of growing old together. But on that crisp October morning in 2025, as she shuffled to her front door in her worn slippers to retrieve the newspaper, she found something far more sinister waiting for her. A neon orange Evict notice plastered across the faded wood. Her hands trembled as she peeled it off, the words blurring through a sudden rush of tears. Failure to comply with community standards. Chronic delinquency in dues. Evict tie-in proceedings to commence in 14 days. The seal of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association glared at her like an accusing eye. Ellen stumbled back inside, the notice clutched in her hand, and sank onto the threadbare couch that still bore the faint imprint of Daniel's frame. Her chest tightened with a cocktail of grief, rage, and disbelief. This was her home, the little bungalow on Sycamore Drive where she and Daniel had raised their daughter, Lily, where they'd danced to jazz records in the kitchen, where he'd whispered promises of forever before cancer stole him away. She fought to keep it standing in his memory, pouring every spare dime into its upkeep despite the HOA's ever-rising fees. And now, they wanted her gone. She'd always known Margaret Voss, the HOA president, had a heart of ice. Margaret was a tall, angular woman with a penchant for tailored blazers and a clipboard she wielded like a scepter. She roamed the neighborhood with an eagle's eye, noting every unshorn blade of grass, every chipped shutter. Ellen had never been to Margaret's whims, never joined her insipid book clubs, or groveled for her approval, and that, she suspected, was her true crime. But this was a declaration of war. For days, Ellen wrestled with despair. She'd fallen behind on dues. Yes, Daniel's modest pension and her part-time library job barely covered the bills, and the HOA had tacked on fines for trivialities like a cracked flower pot or a faded porch light. She'd begged for extensions, sent partial payments, even written a heartfelt letter explaining her widowhood and financial strain. The responses were curt, unyielding, pay up or get out. Now, with the clock ticking, she felt cornered, a mouse beneath a hawk's shadow. In her desperation, she dialed the one person she knew could help her daughter, Lily. Lily Harper was no longer the gangly girl who'd once raced her bike down Sycamore Drive. At 32, she was a rising star in Chicago's legal scene, a corporate attorney with a reputation for dismantling opponents with surgical precision. When she answered Ellen's call, her voice was warm but edged with concern. "Mom? What's wrong? You sound like you've been crying." The dam broke, and Ellen poured out the story, the notice, the fees, the looming deadline. Lily listened in silence, then said, "Scan it all and email it to me. Every notice, every letter, every scrap of paper they've sent you in the last year. I'm coming home." By nightfall, Lily stood on the porch, her sleek black suitcase at her side, her dark hair pulled into a tight bun that belied the fire in her hazel eyes. She hugged Ellen fiercely, then marched inside, spreading the documents across the dining table like a general plotting a campaign. As she read, her jaw tightened, her fingers tapping a restless rhythm. "This is predatory," she muttered, flipping through a stack of fines. $50 for an overgrown hedge, $75 for a mailbox that wasn't regulation height. They're burying you in nickel and dime nonsense to force you out. But they've overplayed their hand. The next morning, Lily strode into the HOA office, her heels clicking against the polished floor. Margaret Voss sat behind a desk, her lips pursed into a thin line. "Miss Harper," she began, her tone dripping with condescension, "your mother's delinquency is well documented. She signed a covenant. She knew the rules." Lily didn't flinch. "And you know the law, Mrs. Voss. EVY tie-ins require due process you've conveniently skipped. I'm requesting a formal hearing, and I want every financial record this HOA has kept for the past 5 years. Margaret's eyes narrowed, but she couldn't refuse. Lily left with a stack of files and a promise of a hearing in 2 weeks. Back at the bungalow, Ellen watched her daughter work with a mix of awe and unease. Lily was relentless, poring over bylaws, cross-referencing state statutes, and digging into the HOA's finances. Late at night, Ellen overheard her on the phone with colleagues, her voice low and urgent. "I need you to pull property records for Willow Creek. Look for patterns, foreclosures, quick sales, anything suspicious." The neighborhood, meanwhile, buzzed with tension. Neighbors who'd once offered Ellen sympathetic nods now avoided her gaze, their whispers trailing her like shadows. She felt like a pariah, an outcast in the community she'd called home for decades. Then came a knock at the door. It was Ruth Delaney, a timid woman from down the street who'd always kept to herself. She glanced nervously over her shoulder before stepping inside. "I heard about the EVY tie-in," she whispered, clutching her purse. "You're not the only one struggling. My husband's on disability, and we can't keep up with the fees either. Margaret threatened to fine us for a dented gutter if we complained." Ellen's heart raced. "How many others?" she asked. Ruth hesitated, then said, "More than you'd think. We're all too scared to fight." That revelation lit a spark in Ellen. She told Lily, who seized it like a lifeline. "If we can prove a pattern of harassment, we've got them," she said, her eyes gleaming. Over the next week, a quiet rebellion brewed. Neighbors slipped notes under Ellen's door or met Lily in secret, handing over their own stacks of notices, fines for peeling paint, penalties for late payments that ballooned beyond reason. One man, a widower named Tom Grayson, shared a story that made Ellen's blood boil. The HOA had tripled his fees after his wife died, forcing him to sell his home of 40 years for a pittance. "They're vultures," Lily said, slamming a fist on the table. "And I'm going to prove it." As the hearing approached, Lily uncovered a bombshell. Buried in the HOA's financials were irregularities, unexplained bonuses paid to board members, funds siphoned into private accounts, and a suspicious spike in home sales after residents were pressured out. She traced the profits to a real estate firm linked to Margaret's brother-in-law. It wasn't just intimidation. It was a racket, a scheme to clear out undesirables and flip their properties for profit. Armed with this, Lily prepared for battle. The hearing was held in the Willow Creek Community Center, a sterile room with folding chairs and a long table where Margaret and her board sat like a tribunal. Ellen's stomach churned as she entered, Lily at her side, but the sight of a small crowd of neighbors who dared to show up gave her a flicker of hope. Margaret opened with a venomous attack, accusing Ellen of neglecting her property and flouting rules, her voice rising with each fabricated slight. Ellen's cheeks burned, but she held her tongue. Then Lily stood. Her voice was calm, cutting through the room like a blade. She dismantled Margaret's claims with precision, citing laws the HOA had violated: failure to offer payment plans, lack of proper notice, abuse of power. Then she dropped the hammer. "This isn't about dues. It's about a systematic campaign to target vulnerable residents' widows, retirees, the disabled, forcing them out to line your pockets." She presented the EVY densa documents, testimonies, bank records, each piece a nail in the HOA's coffin. The room fell silent, Margaret's face paling as Lily continued, "You've exploited this community for years, but it ends tonight." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Ruth stood, her voice trembling but firm. "She fined me for a cracked sidewalk I couldn't afford to fix." Tom followed. "They drove me out after my wife passed." One by one, voices rose, a chorus of outrage and relief. Margaret pounded her gavel, shrieking for order, but the tide had turned. A board member, sweating profusely, moved to adjourn, promising a re-VYEW. Ellen felt dizzy, the weight of the moment crashing over her. A week later, the verdict came. The EVY tie-in was reversed, Margaret resigned under threat of lawsuits, and the HOA faced a state investigation. Ellen's home was safe, but the VY Tory was bittersweet. The betrayal of neighbors who'd stayed silent. The years of quiet suffering it left scars. Yet as Willow Creek began to heal, Ellen found herself at a crossroads. The bungalow held Daniel's ghost in every corner, but it also held her fight, her resilience. Lily, sensing her mother's turmoil, said, "You don't have to stay, Mom. But if you do, you could make this place what Dad always wanted, a real community." Ellen chose to stay. She joined the new HOA board, pushing for fair rules and transparency. Neighbors rallied, hosting potlucks and cleanups, rebuilding what Margaret had broken. And in time, Ellen found something unexpected: companionship. James Carter, a retired carpenter who'd lost his own home to the HOA's schemes, became a friend, then more. They'd sit on her porch, sharing stories of loss and laughter, his calloused hand finding hers. It wasn't a replacement for Daniel, but a new chapter, one she hadn't dared imagine. One evening, as Lily VY sighted for Thanksgiving, she found Ellen hanging a new painting with James, the house alive with light and warmth. "You've built something incredible here, Mom," she said, her voice thick with pride. Ellen smiled, tears brimming. "We did, didn't we?" And in that moment, she felt Daniel's presence, not a ghost, but a blessing urging her forward into a future she'd fought to claim. Would you stand up and fight back, or accept the unreasonable pressure and control from the HOA? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video with more people. Your small action gives us the motivation to keep bringing you more intense and engaging stories. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.